Hi everyone. I think we'll just make a start now. We'll just have maybe some people coming through as we get started, but I'll start us here. My name's Sarah Thompson. I work within the Scottish Government ADR team, and I'd like to kind of present today's information seminar about the flagship dataset, which is the Scottish LEO University extract. So next slide, please. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we are going to have just a little bit of information about ADR Scotland, so that's Administrative Data Research Scotland, and then we're going to go over to cover a bit of information around the LEO dataset in terms of what it covers, how it compares to other versions of LEO, such as the English LEO, how to access future phases of work. And then we're going to go on to have a little discussion around opportunities for research and careers, and then open to questions. So without further ado, we'll just get started. So the first chat comes from myself, just in terms of what we're doing and introductions and so on. So as I mentioned, I'm Sarah Thompson. I work in the Engagement and Impact team within Scottish Government. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, a little bit just about ADR Scotland, just before we get started on the specific data set, just to see sort of where that sits within things. So Administrative Data Research Scotland is part of ADR UK. So as you can see, a kind of a national initiative. And the focus here is trying to transform public sector data into research assets and policy relevant research insights. So how can we make data better available for research? So in terms of ADR Scotland, that's made up by two partners. One is the Scottish Government, and that is led by Alistair McAlpine, who's the Chief Statistician. And then we've also got the Scottish Centre for Administrative Data Research, SCADR, which is led by Professor Chris Dibben. So SCADR brings together all of the researchers from across Scotland, those that are interested in learning about admin data and linkage of data. So that's a really good starting point in terms of ways, bringing together that network, basically. And then it's quite a kind of complicated landscape instead of trying to bring in admin data. And we've got lots of different partners involved in that. So I'll not go into the detail of that, but we've got EPCC, IDRIS, National Records of Scotland, and Research Data Scotland. Effectively, we all work together to try to make a range of data available for research and go through the kind of access and approvals processes for that. Next slide, please. And just a little bit on what Scottish data is available for research that utilises admin data and data linkage. And the first port of call is to have a look at the Research Data Scotland metadata catalogue, and that outlines the data that has been made available through Scottish data controllers. That data is available through the Scottish National Safe Haven, which is our trusted research environment. And that's a big, I'll not list it all here, but it's education to education to health data sets and beyond. And then you can also have a look at the ADR UK data catalogue, and where that kind of explains what sits within ONS's Secure Research Service, which is a kind of wider range of information. Quite a lot of UK data sets also cover Scotland as well. And on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see that we've got ADR flagship data sets. So within Scotland, we've got two. So today's presentation is about LEO and what the Longitudinal Educational Outcomes dataset has, and that's available within the ONS. And our looked after children data set actually sits within the Scottish National Safe Haven. So just slightly different, just depending on the type of data that's in there. We've also just listed a range of other ones that might be of interest in the Scottish context. So I'll Rapid is a particular interest in one that's just become made available. So please do kind of look up some of the other options. Next slide. And I don't want to go too much of it. There has been a seminar about the ADR UK PhD Studentships call. I'll not go into detail here. It's only really just to say that that is a current funding opportunity, and you can have a look at the website about that, the ADR UK PhD Studentships link for wider information. The key thing here is that Leo is one of the data sets. So all of those flagships that I mentioned are the ones that you would need to use in order to apply for this. So have a look at that information. That it's great that we've got a funding opportunity that relates to Leo, and I think that's probably all that I need to cover for just now, other than the fact that there's quite a close deadline of September for that. Next slide. And really, this is just a sort of a slide to say the ADR engagement and impact team, we're always really interested in all the research that people would like to do, and feel free to get in touch with us from the early parts of your process. You can see here we're really interested in making sure that there's policy relevant research that's going on, support to making access possible, and all the way through to the other end in terms of trying to realise the impacts of the research that you've done. So please, I've got our details there. Please do reach out if you've got any questions around that. And I'm going to pass you over to Ewan Shields now, who is from the Scottish Government and is the Leo lead. So I will pass over to you, Ewan.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, as Sarah said, I'm the Scottish Government Leo lead, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Leo dataset that we've shared with researchers. Just kind of cover the main differences between Leo in Scotland and Leo in England, how our sort of linkage works and how the data is sort of built and cleaned, because it's quite useful to understand that in terms of understanding then how you can use the data, and then some of the key variables and how the dataset looks. So yeah, without further ado, I'll just kind of take you through that. And yeah, so in terms of the English Leo, the main data sets that really feed into that are the National Pupil Database, the UCAS data, the Higher Education Statistics Agency data covering sort of all higher education from universities, and HMRC DWP and ONS data on various labour market outcomes and industry codes, etc. And also in England, they have the longitudinal individualised learner record, which covers a lot of the further education and apprenticeships and such. However, in Scotland, we don't have it quite the same. So our data linkage really started with looking a lot at our post-16 education. So the first data set we actually linked in was our HESA data, meaning that we were looking at a lot of the graduate outcomes for those who go through Scottish universities. And in terms of the education on further education and apprenticeships, instead in Scotland, these are held by Skills Development Scotland, who hold information on modern apprenticeships, which we've linked into our Leo, and also the Scottish Funding Council, who hold information on all sorts of vocational courses and some higher education as well, such as HNDs, HNCs, and other sorts of further education, which is also linked in separately to our Leo process. However, in terms of what Leo currently has that's shared for research, it is mainly this higher education statistics agency data linked into the HMRC DWP and ONS outcomes, meaning that essentially we can look at all sorts of earnings, employment, benefits, outcomes for those who progress through Scottish universities. Currently, we do not have anything from schools or the UCAS data. However, I'll speak more to that at the end to talk about what sort of further developments we're looking to do in this space. In terms of how the data works, I think this is useful to understand, just to kind of understand what actually happens. We collect our data from the various agencies and share this with DWP, and they're able to essentially link on the tax and benefits data, and they share this back with both DFE and ourselves, and that allows us to basically clean up the data and present a very clean version of the tax records of these individuals. Now, there are different ways you can look at Leo, and basically with our university extract, we've decided to present the dataset for researchers as a sort of more clean version, where we have each record as someone's employment record for the full term. Whereas I think for some other shared Leo data, it can be quite a lot and it's a bit more messy and requires a bit more SQL code. So it's just to say quite straight away that this data has been cleaned quite a lot so that researchers can use this data quite quickly after accessing it. In terms of how the dataset looks, currently we have about 2.8 million records from those who go through universities. And yeah, as I said, each of these records sort of represents information about when someone studied, about their characteristics, and what their sort of earnings and employment outcomes can be. the Leo data has a slight lag. So in terms of when a year of tax data is fully ready and linked into the Leo, it's usually about 2 years behind. So currently we're slightly behind on what's shared for research. We're up to the 21-22 tax year. However, as of this year, we should be able to get linked in the 23-24 tax year. So we're basically every year we update a new tax year worth of data for what's being processed, and also that interests the new academic year worth of students as well. So every single year, we're not only getting another tax year and academic year worth of students, we actually get a new tax year for everyone who's already linked in through Leo, which can make it really powerful in longer terms, especially for those who are linked in from, say, early academic years like 2008-9, where basically we keep adding a tax year onto them every single year and can look at their outcomes for a long, long time. In terms of how Leo data is actually cleaned, I always find this helpful just to go through to kind of explain exactly what we end up with at the end and why the variables look like they do. Basically, employment data can be quite messy. It's never quite clear in terms of when someone starts and finishes work through HMRC data, and quite often we have a lot of unknown periods and ranges. So I've put in a very fictional employment record here just to kind of talk about what we do to this, but very often we might see a few certain employment records, but we might not know when someone started, say, employment record C there, and we might not know when someone ended D, and if it overlaps with E at all. And what we do is we carry out various cleaning and imputation methods where basically we look at, well, what are the maximum, minimum possible distances that these dates can take. And we basically use as much information around everyone's employment records. And we also look at their out of work benefit records as well to try and inform the possible dates that these employment ranges can take. And once we do that, we run a various sort of procedures around imputation to get a cleaned tax record such that we can basically work out how many days someone has worked in a tax year. And from that, we're then able to derive a lot of things around their earnings and basically what are someone's annualized earnings for the year and how much of a year someone has worked. So I probably don't need to go into this too much, but you might imagine that when we're doing this, basically, it's more common for gaps between employments to be quite small rather than large. People usually move from one job into another quite quickly. So we take from the distribution of known gaps, essentially, when we're imputing on this data. And we know that the gaps between employment records are usually quite small. So we take every record where we definitely know the gaps between employments, and we use that to inform the rest of the Leo data, such that basically the Leo data is being informed on a very good basis for what employment records actually look like. Once all that cleaning's done, we create a lot of sort of employment flags and various derived variables. The main ones of these being sort of looking at sustained employment and further study, which can tell us, is someone in sustained employment throughout the year, and we can see this for every single tax year. We can also look at the proportion of year employment and also look if they're in self-assessed employment as well. And we can use these for a number of flags and combinations of things. In our high-level analysis in Scottish Government, we tend to just focus on sustained employment, but all of these flags are available in the research data for someone to use as they see fit, basically, for what they think they want to look at. In terms of the earnings data, again, we can look at PAYE daily earnings. You can look at annualized earnings as well, and we can also look at the self-assessed earnings. Now, self-assessed earnings cannot be annualized up or sort of associated with days worked, as they do not have any days returned to HMRC. So it's really just the self-assessed raw earnings, where basically someone is saying they're earning that much through self-assessed means. And again, we include various flags to whether or not we include them in our calculations. In terms of other variables available, DWP also has a customer information system by which they have a lot of information about where someone works. And one of the things in that is basically the location. So we can see for each tax year that we've got LinkedIn where someone was working. And we can see that based on the country code or the region or the local authority. And we also have the travel to work area, which I think is an ONS made variable, which basically dictates where would the most likely sort of commuting city be for if they were to work. Other variables we have industry variables as well. This has been linked on from the IDBR, the Interdepartmental Business Register, through ONS, and that allows us to see also what industry people are employed in as well. So you can really start to map out quite clever things where you're looking at sort of, what does someone study? Do they go to work in a similar field, and whereabouts are they working? And sort of really start mapping out lots of different stages. So it can get quite in depth when you're sort of analysing the Leo data in that way. And then other things as well, you've seen a part of this already. We have a lot of the education and personal characteristics variables linked in as well. Whatever we have linked in basically comes from the education data we link in. I always say that Leo is quite simple. It is only education data linked to tax and benefits records. So from the tax and benefits records, we have their earnings employment benefits. But from the education data, that basically dictates everything else we have here. So from HESA, we have the subject studied, level of study, year of study, etc., and all the things about what someone's education was like. I've put a little note there to say that institution attendance is currently unavailable due to the complex legislation we have underpinning how things are shared and the names of institutions being included. However, I'm hoping that we get past that quite soon and are able to include some sort of form of indication of institution there. I'll just quickly talk a bit about dataset access. In terms of the data, it's currently hosted on the SRS. There's some instructions there and also a QR code which you can scan, which hopefully takes you to the page. And in terms of using this, you can go in through ONS Metadata Works, and in there you can add the Scottish Leo data to your cart, and also through that you can look at various documentation such as the data dictionary, and hopefully soon there should be a user guide there as well, which describes a bit more about some of the concepts we've been talking about how you use these variables and flags, which is basically should be a sort of good quick start guide to allow you to help you to use the data more effectively. And in terms of once an application's been done, there's several stages of approval, by which Scottish Government also have approval process as well, where we'll basically review your application and basically either talk to you about it if you think it's not quite a right fit, or sort of approve that, and it will kind of go through various stages through the RAP as well to approve the application for research. In terms of the future, I mentioned a bit about at the start about how we don't currently have some datasets linked in. So we've got three kind of key pieces of work we need to really build on. In terms of the current data shared, we want to make additional variables available basically for that Scottish Leo University dataset, just to further help any research that's going on about looking at graduate outcomes and what people study in university. So we're hoping that in the upcoming update to this dataset, which should be in about September 2025, we'll have additional variables there on that dataset itself. In terms of future projects, at the start of this, I also mentioned that we had our Scottish colleges and MA Leo data. That is all linked in. However, that is a lot newer than the universities data. The universities was the first thing that we got linked into our Leo process, and so it's the thing that we're most comfortable with, the thing that's had the most QA on as well. We are currently at the step where we feel like we probably could share the colleges and MA data. However, this requires buy-in from both Skills Development Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council because it is their data essentially. So there's a lot of work to kind of work with them and get them comfortable to the point where basically we can share that data for research as well. And one of the key advantages of this is not only can we work with these datasets by themselves, is that when these datasets are linked into DWP and HMRC, they have a unique tax identifier, which means essentially if you and Shields his record from school was put into the HMRC WP, they'd say, oh yeah, that's you and here's his tax record. And if my record from university was also put into that, they'd say, oh yeah, that's you and here's his tax record. And that means that we've got that unique ID now, which can map across both the schools and universities and sort of allows you to link up with that sort of learner journey. And basically, once more data is added into this, the more we can sort of map out all these different journeys for education through school, colleges, universities, etc. So there's a lot of benefits to getting more of this data added in because it'll allow us to do more sort of linked and mapped out working. Now also, we're going to look into getting the Scottish schools data linked in. This has been a bit more complex due to the way that schools data is collected in Scotland and where it's held. However, for both of these projects, we do have a PhD intern starting next month, who will be hopefully taking forward a lot of this work and doing a lot of engagement with the schools colleagues to understand what they want from this data, how we best link it in, what variables we should include. And same for the college and universities, we're getting Scottish Funding Council and SDS involved in some big projects where we're looking at doing further analysis and hopefully sharing the data for further use. So I think that is my slides done now, and I'm going to be passing over to Professor Ian Atherton, who's been doing some work with the Leo recently.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the research potential of the Scottish Leo dataset. I'm Professor of Nursing and Data Science at Edinburgh Napier University. So education isn't the central to my expertise, but I think that that's really quite appropriate in a sense to talking about this dataset because it has got such wide applicability. So as Ewan mentioned, we've taken forward quite a small scale study over the last few months to really utilize this data set. When we became aware that Ewan was developing it, given other work that we're doing around the nursing and midwifery professions, we really saw an opportunity. So I'm going to use that work to kind of illustrate what can be done. But really my intention here is to think more broadly about what people might do with that data. So it's by no means, what I'm going to suggest is by no means comprehensive. It's just my own sort of personal thoughts on directions in which the data set can be usefully used. I think it's a hugely powerful data set. We know that education is a driver for so many parts of modern society. We know that education in general is one of the best predictors of health outcomes. But even looking at university education, which at the moment the Scottish Leo data set is very much focused on, that has so many implications. So if you think about the nursing profession, the midwifery professions, they are absolutely dependent on university education. So we want to understand what is happening in terms of the pipeline into those professions, then it is an absolutely ideal data set. And that is just one example. I think data such as this, I'm kind of biased because administrative data is central to my research and my working life. But it is a really powerful opportunity, and it's a powerful opportunity for a number of reasons, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a few moments. But first of all, it's event data. So it's not just a snapshot in time. You can see over a period of time what is happening to people. And that's, again, as I'll touch on when I'm talking a little bit about the study we've done looking at transitions from university into the workplace amongst nurses. That is quite powerful. It's longitudinal, so you can follow people over a period of time, and you can look at outcomes. You can look at events at one point in time, and look at their association with events some time later. And with some very careful thought, you can move beyond just describing. You can think about causation. And there's a whole range of things, and again, I'll touch more on this in a few moments, but there's a whole range of things that you can, elements that you can focus on. I think the other real strength of this data set is that it is a Scottish data set. Education is a devolved responsibility. So there have been divergences within the university system in Scotland relative to the rest of the UK. And that opens up lots of opportunities. It opens up opportunities for essentially natural experiments, whether comparing between other parts of the UK and Scotland, or between different points in time. And so that really gives it a lot of policy value, not just for Scotland, but for the wider UK, understanding how policy, what the implications of policy have been. And that's also got generalizability far beyond our shores. So I think it's a really useful and powerful data set. So if I can just, sorry, can we move on to the next slide, Ewan? Thanks. So yeah, just a little schema of sort of kind of how I envisage the data set. So, and essentially this is, well, I'll come to that in a moment. So essentially you've got people going through university. You can see from the arrow in the middle, the central arrow, that that person didn't complete their degree. So you've got information on people who didn't complete, including at what point in time they ceased to be engaging in their degree. And then you've got information on people who did complete, and hence the little scrolls, emoticons that I put in there. And then excitingly, you've got that move into the workplace, and you can see what is happening to people in the years following. And that given the time periods of data that's available, for people in the earlier parts of the data set, you've got many years of looking at outcomes in terms of employment, the kinds of jobs that people go into, the income that they earn, and benefits that they draw on. And that's powerful for a whole number of reasons. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. If we could move on to the next slide, Ewan. So yeah, as I mentioned, we've taken forward this study of transitions of nursing students into the workplace. Here we have some students from Edinburgh Napier University. Picture taken some years ago. They will now all be out in the workplace. What is happening to them and all their colleagues? Well, that was really what we were thinking about with our study. So we move on to the next slide. And so, yeah, if we think about this schema again, we've got information there on people entering their nursing degrees. We've got information on who doesn't complete their nursing degree and who does. And then we've got information on what occupations they actually went into when they finished, those that successfully concluded, and specifically in what areas. So from a policy point of view, this is really interesting because Scotland is the only, over a period of time, was the only part of the UK where nursing students were receiving a bursary. So it's not something we've done yet, but something we could do later on is to compare what we found in Scotland for that period of time in England where bursaries were not being awarded. That would be something we could look at. But what we've looked at is specifically what occupations people went into and when, how quickly they moved into those occupations, which, given the investment that Scottish Government make in nurse education from a policy perspective, is really valuable. So that's an indication of how the data set can work, that longitudinal element, that policy relevance. So Ewan, if we can move on to the next slide. So I'll come back to the nursing study. I'll tell you a little bit about what we found, but I'll keep you on tenterhooks. Let me just first of all move back more widely and think about just what this data set can enable. Points I've touched on already. So first of all, it's got considerable potential for longitudinal analysis. So it can include looking at people's progression through their time in university to completion or dropping out, and at what point if people are dropping out, at what point are they dropping out? And then we've got the opportunity to look at what happens moving beyond their time in university into the workplace. How much are they earning? Does it differ between different groups? Benefits that people are drawing on. Of course, that's got big implications from a point of view of government policy. But as I'll touch on in a moment, it's also a proxy for so many other things. If we can move on to the next slide, Ewan. So another really powerful thing about administrative data, of which Scottish LEO is a really good example, it is whole population data. So the numbers are very large, and that's really helpful for a number of reasons. Firstly, you can look at very specific groups. There are some amazing nationally representative survey data sets out there, including some amazing longitudinal data sets. I don't know if you've had experience. When I was doing my PhD, I tried to use the labour force survey for a particular element of my my doctorate. And I'm really excited to see these large numbers. But as soon as I focused in on the group that I was interested in, suddenly cell sizes were too small to be really helpful. So for looking at some groups, actually having whole population data is really powerful. So, for example, it enabled us to look at nurses. If we try to use any nationally represented survey, we have done, but the numbers are relatively small, and we're limited to some quite crude analysis. So you can look at very specific groups, and I've noted a few examples in these bullet points. Occupations such as nurses, but it might be you can focus on the specific degrees that people studied, specific socio-demographic groups, perhaps mature students relative to school leavers. There's some information on disabilities, self-reported disabilities from within the university's data. What are the implications of disabilities? Something that you could look at, given the numbers that are available here. And my PhD was in geography, so I note the potential to look at specific geographies. And Ewan touched on the geographical elements that you might focus on. But there's information on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, at point at which people were applying to university. And again, from a policy perspective, that's something Scottish government have had a lot of interest in. And also there's the Scottish Urban Rural Index. So given Scotland's diverse geography, again, lots of potential for policy relevant analysis. If we can move on to another slide, the next slide, Ewan. Yeah, and as I mentioned when I was introducing myself, education is a devolved responsibility. So that's got lots of potential from point of view of ensuring that your analysis is, of your PhD students' analysis is policy relevant. It's almost hard to analyze this data set without it having policy relevance. But I've noted a few approaches that are really enabled, whether by just using this data set on its own, or by drawing on the obvious example is the other LEO data sets. All kinds of hypothesis testing that you can do natural experiments. So an important element of using this pseudonymized data is that it is demonstrably in the public interest, and that's something you have to, when you're applying for the data, you have to explain how it's in the public interest. My sense is that it would be very hard to analyze this data set without it being in the public interest. So really powerful opportunity for whoever the lucky PhD student is, if they end up using this data set. Ewan, if we can move on to the next slide. And yeah, I mean, in terms of subject areas, again, not comprehensive. These are just a few examples. Education is the obvious one. Lots of questions around the pandemic and what's the results of the pandemic. But really, it's hard to think of an area where education and university education does not have implications. I mentioned caring there, and that's an example of one that I've given some thought to in terms of almost using variables as proxies. So, with benefits data, there is, the potential to, people are claiming benefits related to childcare or unpaid care. Lots of potential there. I think time's pressing on, so we could move on to the next slide. So yeah, just a few reflections before I briefly tell you about what we found in our own study. So yeah, I've mentioned the idea of think laterally when you're looking at the data set. There are a large number of variables there. It's possible that the exact variable that you need isn't currently within that data set, but you think laterally around the way in which other data might enable you to get at the issue that you're interested in. So think widely and think creatively in terms of variables as proxies. There is some fantastic resources already available that Ewan and his colleagues have put together. So opportunity to really get to know your data set. The LEO research community, which supports the LEO data set in England, really valuable when we were developing our study. We reached out to them on a couple of occasions and were able to get some really good advice on specific questions that we had. And lots of opportunity for capacity building and policy engagement. So yeah, in terms of really developing your project, whether it's of these PhDs or whether it's using Scottish Leo more generally, yeah, reach out, build up your networks. If I can move on to the next slide, Ewan. So yes, let me go back, come full circle to our study of nurses and their transitions into practice. So big concerns about shortages of nurses, and yet some news stories around, well, nurses not getting jobs when they complete. To what extent is that an issue? And concerns about students starting their training but not completing. So those concerns we've been able to look at using Scottish Leo. If we can move on to the next slide, Ewan. So first thing we did was to just check our data for completeness, and this graph shows the numbers of people completing over each of the years within our analysis, and the numbers of students not completing. So we added them together. We looked at reports from NHS Scotland, and the numbers was a little bit short of what we expected, but taking into account that some open university data is not included, then our indication is that this was a very complete data set for people completing their nursing degrees. So we can move on to the next slide. And what we found was actually a really high percentage of people do complete their nursing degrees. So we found over 90%. And that stands in contrast to previous studies, which have tended to use a snapshot, that have looked at people who complete within the 3 years of their training, which inevitably showed a much lower completion rate. By using this event data and being able to look across a period of time, we're able to show that actually it's a very high completion rate. And we move on to the next slide, Ewan. Yeah, again, using that employment data, using these SIC codes, quite broad, but nonetheless, again, provided some really valuable insights and engagement with NHS Scotland. This is not something they've been previously able to get at previously. What we found is the vast majority of people do go into employment within 1 year of completing their nursing degrees. And that in the main, they are what you would expect. So you'll see in the top left-hand corner, hospital activities, 2/3 do go into working in hospitals. And even those that don't, they are going into areas where a nursing degree would be hugely valuable. So just randomly selecting some general medical practice, nursing homes, residential care. Tiny numbers going to work in, they would go public houses and bars, 1/3%, retail sales, 0.5%. So again, a good news story, really. The vast majority of people getting jobs and getting jobs in the healthcare sector. So valuable policy relevant insights and enabled through the Scottish Leo data set. So I can move on to the next slide, Ewan. So yeah, just in conclusions, I think it's a really valuable resource. Given my area of interest, I focused in on the nursing profession, but that's only an exemplar of what could be done much more widely. Specific groups other than nurses, or looking across the Scottish population. Thanks to the work that you and colleagues are doing, increasing number of resources to support your project development. I really do hope that we see people using this data. I think it's great. Next slide, Ewan. So yeah, I'll just conclude there. I hope that's given some food for thought. And let me just thank Alice Pearsons, who's the researcher who's done all the clever analysis that I've shown you the results from. And especially huge thanks to yourself, Ewan, and indeed all your colleagues that have made this possible. And I'll hand back to yourselves, Helen, Ewan.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Sarah.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. That just to say thank you to Ian and Ewan for all the detail there. I think really lots of food for thought about how we can go about using this great data. So I suppose now it's just we've got 20 minutes for questions. If anybody has any kind of thoughts, comments, questions for anyone, please do raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Oh, we've got one already. So, Anya Micah. Anya Micah, you're on mute.
Thanks, both of you. Really interesting presentations. I'm not sure who this question is best for, but it's about non-completions. And Ian, I'm aware that you said that non-completion rate is actually really low for nurses, which is great to hear. But I'm interested in how you or Ewan think you can get to an understanding of why students don't complete rather than just that they don't complete, and where you can kind of marry the stats against maybe a more qualitative understanding. And that can then lead into assisting with the sort of policy response to that.
So perhaps if I can just touch on that. So with the data in its as it currently stands, there's various elements that you can use to get a sense as to maybe not why people are not completing, but who is most vulnerable to not completing, which kind of does give an indication as to what's going on. So, you know, a good example of the socio-demographics. So, you know, is it younger students, older students, which we have used, and the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. So, you know, people come from more deprived circumstances. You know, is that something which leads to a greater risk of non-completion? So yeah, possible to get some indication as to the reasons. As the data set develops as well, you had mentioned other data sets being linked in, the opportunities to really understand that. And again, that longitudinal perspective, you know, looking back prior to people coming into university, you know, will increase its potential. Again, I suppose thinking creatively, this idea of proxies, you know, looking at what benefits people are drawing on once they complete might also give some indications potentially. So yeah, a few thoughts there. I don't know if you've got any thoughts to add to that, to you.
I think I agree with most of what you say. It's always tricky marrying up with quality stuff, but we do have a lot of demographic information on people, and we can sort of really start to understand exactly who are the people dropping out. And yeah, I'll probably say that repeating what Ian's saying, but yeah, we can definitely sort of narrow it down to who we think is most at risk and who's the most vulnerable groups, and then potentially do something more bespoke off of that. But as Ian also said, we can add more and more variables over the years, and the more that we add, will be more powerful to really start honing in on who these groups are and who's most at risk.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got a question here from Orion, please.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thanks, it's really interesting presentation, and yeah, I have been using the English Leo, so I'm really interested to see and think through some of the differences with the Scottish one, which I think could be really advantageous actually. I just had two questions. One was about the benefits data, and just to check, my understanding is with the English one that it's just employment related benefits. So I think I'd asked in the past whether child benefit was there, and they said it wasn't. But so I'm just curious as to whether that is the case. And the second one, which I don't know if you can really, I was just very interested in the difference with the way that the income data is shown, and the kind of level of detail there about the number of days worked and daily pay and that kind of thing. Sounds very interesting, but I might just have to look into that in more detail myself.
If I could just briefly touch on that before handing over to Ewan. So yeah, that may be a misunderstanding on my part. So Ewan, you'll have more knowledge of this than I do. Any thoughts?
Yes. So So I think the main ones that we include are only active labour market benefits. So there, I don't think child benefits are in there. So it's anything that's an active labour market benefit that's been included. There may be more potential to add further benefits in the future, but I think for now it's just going to be that. And in terms of how it presents the earnings, so I'm not overly sure in which way DFE do it with the English, Leo. But I think there's a lot of options to present it in various ways. I think we find daily earnings quite useful and also analysed earnings. But yeah, I think I'm quite open to how we build this data and what variables we create. I think nothing's really set in stone. I think just also on Kevin's question as well about is there any social origin data as well coming in? Basically, how the data works in the Scottish Government is that because of Leo data's very sort of sensitive nature, we only get some bits of HISA linked into it. However, whatever that sum is, we can adjust that to as long as we're not at risk of sort of re-identifying anyone or disclosing anything. And so further variables from HISA can be linked in to cover all sorts of things. So yeah, there is opportunities to add in more variables, both from sort of HISA side and also different derived variables for earnings and such.
Great, thanks, Ewan. We've got a question on the chat from Kevin, which is there any social origin data there or coming parental socioeconomic status? I think there's parental information in HISA.
Oh yeah. So you're just touching that there. So this could potentially be added in. We do just have a cut of the HISA linked in, but I have a person in my team who's got full access to HISA, and we have regular meetings to basically discuss can more be added without any risk of re-identification for Leo. So yeah, it's definitely potential to add that in.
Can I just add to that as well, Ewan, because if schools data is added in, I think will be some information on free school meals, and
Yes.
Would that be a useful indicator, I wonder?
So the main things I think we'll get for the schools policy, we'll get free school meals. We'll also get EMA to understand if we could do any sort of more sort of cost benefits of EMA. And I think there's a few other schools policy flags with that as well, which would allow us to see some long-term things. But yeah, free school meals should be there.
Brilliant, thanks. A question from Anna Newmica for you, and was, is there industry variable for tracking green jobs?
So green jobs, that depends on exactly the standard industrial classifications that are linked into the data. I understand that there was a new IDBR SIC coding released recently, so I've still to review that and understand if that changes our mappings at all. But in terms of what the SIC used to be, I think because green jobs is a relatively newer concept and the SIC codes were quite old, we didn't have a precise mapping before, but there's potential with a revised SIC code listing that we could start mapping more to some sort of these sort of modern jobs, for instance, sort of looking at sort of green jobs or things related to AI, etc. So it does depend a little bit on the LinkedIn IDBR data.
Brilliant, thanks, Ewan. And we've got a question from Kevin, which is, would it be realistic to link data within the timescales of a PhD? Ian, I don't know if you want to.
So I mean, Ewan's probably better placed to answer that. I mean, I suppose what I would say is that linking data is very time consuming. It's a huge piece of work that Ewan's done in getting the data set to this stage. So I think if you're thinking of linking in other data sets, but Ewan's going to be better placed than I. But I would have thought that there's very limited opportunity there. But Ewan, I don't know if you want to address that.
So yeah, the data that we receive, the lead data we have is pseudonymized. It's pseudonymized after linking the HISA data to DWP and HMRC records. So the HISA data is already linked to it to basically get the correct tax and benefits records. Now, in terms of being able to link in HISA data within the title's PhD, we don't really have further linkage on at the moment, so that's probably not possible. But what we could do is if there was a list of potential variables or things of interest from HISA, we could always discuss that as part of a sort of dataset development. But yeah, it's quite tricky to further link it just because it's pseudonymized.
Brilliant. Yeah, I suppose the only thing I would add to that is that the benefit here is all of the work that Ewan's done to provide a linked data set, and so lots of the work that's kind of part of the idea of flagships, is some of the work has been done for you. So although it might be not everything that you'd ever want, the benefit is it's ready to go and it's accessible. So hopefully, yes, I would say it should be accessible for timescales of PhDs, but obviously it's something that we'd be happy to discuss as well if you do want to reach out. Any other questions or comments? Looks like we've kind of explored them all. So I think, as we've mentioned again, we've got, if you put the next slide on, Ewan, I think we've maybe got another one. Thank you. Yeah, this is just a bit of a getting in touch contact details for all of us, and please do reach out. It would be really interesting to hear if people have got any other questions or ideas, or like Ewan said, anything in relation to providing feedback for the kind of further later enhanced versions of Leo as well. So please do that. I see that Kevin, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I just noticed that I've had my mic unmuted, so I can't actually talk. Yeah, I just had one quick question. So you follow people up over time. Do you follow them if they move outside of Scotland, or is it only Scottish people that you're tracking? Like if they move to England or Wales or other parts of the UK?
So is anyone in the UK who has attended a Scottish institution who works still in the UK. So if they work in the UK, as long as their tax benefits data is collected by HMRC, then we do have them in the data. So lots of people will have in their data will be working in England, London, wherever. So yeah, we do retain that, but where we do lose them is if they move abroad, because the data is not collected, we don't have their working information, then it's collected by whatever country's government they move to. So we lose that. And also we don't currently collect a lot of the non-UK stuff for Leo as well. So we don't have that linked in the moment. But in terms of who we do have, yeah, we've got all UK learners who go to Scottish institutions, and then if they stay to work in the UK, we've got their data.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that makes sense, obviously. I mean, I wouldn't expect you to track them if they move to the USA or whatever, but yeah, within the UK, it makes sense. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. A question from Anya Micah. Do you have a sense of how universities are making use of the data on student destinations, whether this informs teaching practice or course design?
Perhaps I can come in there. I don't, but again, the potential of thinking about PhDs, the potential to contribute to universities and help them to better understand their students. As you mentioned, currently there isn't information on specific universities that people are going to. But the potential nonetheless to help students to understand, universities to understand the progressions that students are making is quite considerable. Again, Ewan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, if I was to be candid, I'd say sometimes the relationship between Leo and universities can be a little bit strained, because in the past I think they're sort of uneasy about a lot of like publishing earnings and employments data of their graduates and getting compared to other universities and kind of creating a sort of league table. So in terms of how they make use of this sort of student destination information in their sort of university planning, I'm not really aware that they use it too much, but I would like to see more in that space, because I think it is very helpful information to be able to see how successful graduates are from certain courses. And I think English U currently does have a sort of website where they sort of look at different career trajectories of what you can go to study and then what your outcomes and earnings are. I'll try to find a link for that soon. But I think it is helpful, but I'm not sure how to use it currently. As I say, I think there was a bit of worry in the past about how people exactly use these legal outcomes and sort of gauge universities' performance.
Brilliant, thank you. Any other final comments or questions? Great. Well, I mean, I think that's been hopefully really useful to everyone. Thanks for coming along and hearing and contributing to this. We will. We're here. We're here to please do get in touch. Otherwise, have a good rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.